Don't sign those papers, Mr. Vance. Please don't touch that pen. Piper Kowalski stood at the entrance to the 38th floor boardroom of Vance and Forsyth LLP, with her sneakers squeaking against the polished marble and her voice coming out smaller than she had practiced it in the hallway. She was 10 years old. She was wearing her school sweatshirt, and every person in that room was looking at her the way people look at a squirrel that has wandered into a cathedral. Alistair Vance set the pen down. Not because he believed her, because she was a child, and even the most accomplished men pause when a child runs into a room with that particular expression on their face, the look of someone carrying something far heavier than they should have to carry alone. The boardroom of Vance and Forsyth occupied the corner of a Bay Street tower in downtown Toronto, 38 stories above the December Street. Frost had formed at the edges of the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the city below moved in slow streams of red and white light. Inside, the room was warm and smelled of cedar and good wine. 23 people sat around a table set with cream linen and polished crystal, senior partners, founding clients, 2 federal judges who had once been Alistair's articling students, and his son Colin, who had flown in from Vancouver that morning. It was meant to be a celebration. After 38 years, Alistair Vance was stepping back from active practice to take the title of Senior Counsel Emeritus. The transition documents had been prepared over 6 months by the firm's governance committee. Tonight, he would sign them. Nigel Forsyth, his partner of 22 years, would countersign as incoming managing partner. Then there would be speeches, champagne, and the kind of warm, expensive evening that men like Alistair were supposed to receive at the end of a life built carefully and well. The signing folder sat at the head of the table, a slim leather binder with the firm's crest embossed in gold on the cover. Alistair had been reaching for it when Piper ran in. Lena Kowalski appeared at the doorway 2 seconds behind her daughter. A cleaning cart handle, still in one hand, her face the color of winter pavement. She was the supervising custodian for floors 34 through 40. She had worked in this building for 11 years. She had never once been cause for concern. She was cause for concern now. Mr. Vance, Lena said, breathless. I am so sorry. She was supposed to be in the staff lounge. There was a film on. She knows better. Mama, listen to me, Piper said, not looking at her mother. She was looking at Alistair. Mr. Forsyth went into the document room, the one with the glass door. He had the folder. I saw him take a page out and put a different one in. Silence moved through the room the way cold air moves through an open door. Sudden and complete. Nigel Forsyth sat 3 chairs to the left of Alistair. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, and composed in the particular way of men who have spent decades being the most assured presence in a negotiation. He did not stand immediately. He took a slow breath, set down his wine glass, and turned to look at Piper with an expression of patient, exhausted regret, the look of a man who has been accused of something before and knows exactly how to outlast it. Sweetheart, Nigel said. I'm not your sweetheart, Piper said. A nervous sound moved through the table, not quite a laugh. A senior partner near the center leaned toward her colleague and said nothing, but the expression said everything. The cleaning woman's daughter. The cleaning woman's daughter had just interrupted a 38-year career milestone to accuse the incoming managing partner of document fraud. Colin Vance, who was sitting beside his father and who had not yet taken a sip of his wine, was watching Piper very carefully. What page? Colin said. Colin, Alistair said with a tone that meant not now. What page did he switch? Colin said again, ignoring his father entirely. Piper looked at him. It was in the middle. Page 7, I think. Maybe 8. It had a red tab. He folded the old one up and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he took a new one from a white envelope with a blue stripe on the corner. Nigel exhaled slowly. Alistair, I apologize for having to address this in front of your guests. But since the child has chosen to make it a public matter, he paused, looking briefly around the table for support and finding it in the small, sympathetic nods of people who wanted the discomfort to end. I did go into the document room this evening. I went to check the folder. I have been preparing these documents for 6 months. Of course I touched them. Of course I had them in my hands. You had a white envelope, Piper said. I don't recall a white envelope. A chair shifted somewhere at the far end of the table. The sound of it was very loud. Lena, Alistair said gently, take your daughter and wait in the hall. We'll be finished shortly. Lena reached for Piper's shoulder. Baby, come now. He switched a page, Piper said. She did not shout it. She said it the way someone states a fact they know to be true and cannot understand why it is not being received as one. I was behind the storage trolley. I wasn't hiding. I was looking for Hama's clipboard. He came in and he didn't know I was there. He had the folder under his arm. He took out the red tab page and put a different one in. Then he retied the ribbon and left. A man near the window said something quietly to the person beside him. The words were not audible, but the tone was, the patient private dismissal that adults give one another when a child has disrupted something important. Alistair looked at Piper for a long moment. She was small, standing in her school sweatshirt with her braids half coming loose, holding absolutely still in a room full of people who wanted her to stop talking. He had known children like this. His own daughter had been like this at 10. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain in the particular way that precedes every other kind of certainty. "We'll have it looked at," Alistair said. "After the evening, I promise." "No, sir." Piper's voice stayed level. "Not after. He already has someone waiting. I heard him on his phone in the hall before he came in." At the table, something shifted in Nigel's expression, just slightly. The patience remained, held in place by long habit, but something beneath it moved, the way water moves beneath thin ice. "This is not acceptable," Nigel said. His voice had lost its warmth entirely. "Alastair, I have sat beside you in court and in boardrooms for 22 years. I have negotiated on your behalf. I sat at your father's funeral. I am standing here in this room, in front of people who have known us both for decades, being accused by a 10-year-old girl whose mother cleans our floors. And you are letting it continue." The words landed with the precision they were designed to have. A few people at the table nodded. Someone murmured agreement. The accumulated weight of 22 years and a room full of witnesses pressed against 10-year-old's account of a white envelope. Colin Vance stood up. "Dad," he said, "don't sign anything yet." "Colin!" "Just wait." He looked at Piper. "Did you see what the new page looked like? Any words you remember?" Piper thought carefully. It had 2 columns. Near the bottom it said something like "power to act" or "authorized to act" in bold. Colin went very still. "What?" Alistair said. "Power of attorney language." Colin picked up the leather folder from the table. "Dad, do not sign this, not until I've read it." "You'll do no such thing," Nigel said, rising. "Those documents are sealed and have been prepared in full compliance with." "Sit down, Nigel," Colin said. He said it the way a much younger man says something to a much older one when the younger man has just stopped being afraid. He said it and it worked, which surprised everyone in the room, including Colin himself. He opened the folder and turned to page 7. The room was completely quiet. Colin read it once, then a second time. He set the folder down and looked at his father. "This is not the equity transition clause." Alistair looked at him. "This is a full power of attorney authorization, broad scope, personal accounts, the remaining equity stake, pending transfer authority, effective upon signature." The quality of the quiet in the room changed. Alistair's eyes moved to Nigel. Nigel's expression had gone somewhere else. The composure still held, kept in place by long habit, but something beneath it had already begun calculating distances. "There must be a drafting error," Nigel said. "The governance committee." "The governance committee prepared the equity clause," Colin said. "This is not a drafting error. This is a different document." Alistair sat very still. 38 years of practice had taught him how to hear a lie, not in the lie itself, but in what the speaker does in the moment before it. The fractional pause. The breath drawn through the nose rather than the mouth. The eyes that move not toward the speaker, but toward the exit. Nigel's eyes moved toward the elevator. "Sit down," Alistair said. His voice was quiet and final. "Howard." He looked toward the door where his head of building security had been posted throughout the evening. "Please make sure no one uses that elevator until I say otherwise." Howard moved without a word. Nigel's phone was already in his hand. "Put it on the table," Alistair said. A long pause. Nigel placed the phone on the table. The next 40 minutes proceeded with the focused efficiency that 23 lawyers in a room tend to produce. 3 partners reviewed the document. 2 confirmed Colin's reading. One of the federal judges, who had been watching from the far end of the table, said only, "I would not let anyone leave this building tonight without calling the RCMP." Alistair's private banker was reached within 8 minutes. A wire transfer authorization had been submitted electronically at 9:43 p.m. using a document bearing Alistair's name. The transfer, $4.2 million, staged across 3 segments to a holding company registered outside Ontario, was pending his verbal confirmation. Alistair gave the banker a different word instead. The wire was cancelled at 10:01 p.m. Somewhere in all of it, Piper had retreated to the doorway. She stood with her back against the frame and her mother's hand on her shoulder, watching the adults in the room finally move with her urgency she had tried to give them 40 minutes earlier. She did not look pleased with herself. She looked like a child who had been carrying something far too heavy and had only just been allowed to set part of it down. 2 officers arrived at 11. Nigel Forsyth said very little. He had been preparing for some kind of ending, it seemed, though not precisely this one. Before he was let out, he stopped at the doorway and looked at Alistair. "I've known you for 22 years, he said. Alistair looked at him steadily. "You've known my access for 22 years. That is not the same thing. If you had known me, truly known me, you would have understood that the one thing I cannot forgive is a child being dismissed in my own boardroom for telling the truth." Nigel looked once at Piper. He was gone before she could see what was in his face. Later, after the guests had been thanked and the room had quieted, Alistair found Piper and Lena in the hallway near the supply room. Lena stood very straight, hands clasped, jaw set with the dignity of a woman who has learned to hold herself carefully in spaces where she is not expected to take up much room. "Mr. Vance," Lena said, "I owe you an apology. She shouldn't have—" "Mrs. Kowalski," Alistair said, "please don't." He looked at Piper. She looked back at him. "I had the pen in my hand," he said. "I know," she said. "I almost signed it." "I know that, too." A long moment passed between them. The building's heating system clicked and hummed. Down the hall, 2 partners were still speaking in low voices near the boardroom door. "I owe you more than an apology," Alistair said, "but an apology is where we start." Piper considered this with the gravity of someone who has been taught that apologies should be received carefully and not wasted. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked. "My banker says yes." "Good." A pause, measured and deliberate. "He looked at the folder when you said page 7, not at you. At the folder." Alistair looked at her. "He already knew it was there," she said. "That's why." Colin, who had been standing in the boardroom doorway, walked slowly into the hallway. He had heard. He looked at his father, then at Piper, then back at his father. "She's right," he said quietly. "I noticed it too. I didn't understand what I was seeing until just now." Alistair nodded. He understood something then that he had been circling all evening without being able to name. The room full of lawyers and judges and decades of shared history had not seen what a 10-year-old girl behind a supply trolley had seen, not because they were less capable, because they had been inside the story too long. Piper had no history with Nigel Forsyth. She had no 22 years of lunches and hard-won cases, and quiet loyalty to weigh against what her eyes were telling her. She had simply seen what was there. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, the boardroom was different. The signing folder was in evidence. The formal linens were gone. Winter light came pale and flat through the frost-edged windows and lay across the long table without ceremony. Piper sat at the far end doing her homework. She had asked if she could use the boardroom while she waited for her mother to finish the evening round. Alistair had said yes without hesitation and had left a cup of hot chocolate at her elbow, which she accepted without ceremony because she was 10. And hot chocolate was hot chocolate. Lena had a new title, Facilities and Building Services Manager, floors 32 through 40, and a small office on the 34th floor with a window that faced east. The salary that came with it would cover the rent increase that had been keeping her awake since September. On Alistair's desk, in an envelope his own lawyer had prepared, was the paperwork for an educational trust in Piper's name. It would carry her through to graduate school, with a modest sum set aside at each stage for whatever she decided she needed next. He had told Lena it was not charity, and that she was free to refuse it. Lena had been quiet for a long time before she said she would not refuse it. Colin had stayed in Toronto. He had stopped mentioning his return flight when people asked. Alistair sat across the table from Piper, now a brief open in his lap, reading. Every so often she asked him how to spell something and he told her without looking up. She thanked him without looking up either. They had arrived at this arrangement naturally, over the course of 2 weeks, the way people arrive at things that work, without discussing them, simply by continuing them. Outside, Bay Street moved in its usual current of purpose and haste. 4 blocks away, in a courthouse that made no exceptions for 22-year partnerships or silver-haired composure, a preliminary hearing was proceeding through its careful stages, slowly, as justice tends to move, and then all at once. Piper turned a page in her notebook. Alistair turned a page in his brief. The hot chocolate steamed quietly between them, and 11 floors below, Lena Kowalski stood at a window. She had passed every working day for 11 years and looked out at the city from a height she had simply never had the moment to notice before. It had always been there. She had always had other things to carry,